Welcome to the story of my life. At least I think it happened this way. Or maybe it was that other thing. Honestly, if I'm going to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice. But I digress. Enjoy Nightwing's full walkthrough of Batman Arkham Origins. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, or else. Well, enjoy the show, and remember, I'll be watching.
Hey, what's happening, gamers? K1 here, and welcome to another lore video, this time taking a trip into the past with Batman's first appearance, Detective Comics number 27, The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, as we kind of free roam in Gotham City. Now, The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, or Detective Comics number 27, first released May 1939 for only 10 cents. Can you believe it? 10 cents. It was also the first time the world met the Batman. Just so you know, I won't really be going into the background of whether or not Bob Kane created Batman or not. Some conspiracy theorists believe that Bill Finger created Batman and Bob Kane ripped him off. But that topic is way too big to get into, so I'm not really going to dive into it. Instead, we'll be looking at Batman's humble beginnings from 1939 and just covering 1939. The Burton Batman film's connection to Detective Comics 27, and trust me, there is a connection, and some other Batman stories from 1939 if we can get to it. Alrighty, I'm sure you're aware Batman was not the first superhero to grace the world's presence. Superman actually leaped onto the scene in 1938 in Action Comics, but we're not going to talk about that, because Batman arrived a year later with DC's Detective Comics series. This comic book also featured a handful of other heroes and murder mystery tales, like all in one book, so it was pretty interesting, while Batman just had one story per issue, and sometimes these stories were continued. Now, Batman and Robin would eventually star in their own comic, May of 1940, with just Batman #1. So there was no denying how popular the character was in Detective Comics. But enough on that. On with the case of the Chemical Syndicate. Our story opens with Bruce Wayne hanging out with Commissioner Gordon for a smoke, because, you know, everybody smoked back then. Couldn't go anywhere without people smoking. I forgot what the conversation detailed, it really doesn't matter. But before things got too boring for our young socialite friend, the phone rings. Jim Gordon then picks up the phone and finds out there's been a stabbing! And for some reason, Commissioner Gordon invites Wayne along for a ride-along to look at the corpse. Why? I don't really know. Maybe it was a common thing then, I don't know. Hey Jim, there's been a stabbing! Should we go investigate it? Well, you're just a civilian, but why don't you come anyway? Anyway, at the scene of the crime, we learn that the stiff was a businessman named Lambert. He also had some other business partners involved. I believe there was 3 other guys, and they own a chemical plant or something. This part of the story actually plays out similar to any gumshoe flick of the 40s, though instead of a beautiful woman in distress, the relative of Mr. Lambert turns out to be his son, who confesses to only finding the body, not killing his dead father. Seems like a strong alibi to me, so while chatting with the son about the dead guy, the reader finds out 2 other business partners have also received death threats that day. Cue the dramatic organ music! You know, like from those radio dramas. Never mind. After the commissioner makes the call to the GCPD with this information, Bruce says, I'm bored and, you know, I don't want to be around, so I'm going home. Jim, thinking nothing of it, says, so long, buddy. And Bruce then becomes the Batman. Meanwhile, another business partner is murdered. Shortly after, as the killers flee, they bump into the dark night under the night sky. Without saying a word, the Batman beats the crap out of the terrified thugs. After what looked like knocking a guy off the roof, Batman picks up a piece of paper that the thugs were trying to steal. Once reading it, Batman smiles, because the case has pretty much now been solved. See the Pink Panther for the reference. He then speeds off into the night in a car that looks like something from a Dick Tracy book. It should also be noted that Bob Kane originally didn't want Batman to stand out, so his vehicles, gadgets, and just everything else looked normal as to just blend in with society, which is actually pretty clever if you think about it, for the time. DC would later use this concept again in the 1970s, giving Batman like an average-looking car, though while it looked average, the car was more than meets the eye on the inside. Back to the case. Paul Rogers, one of Lampert's business partners, rushes over to the last surviving member, Alfred Stryker. No, this isn't Alfred the Butler. That comes much later in the Batman books. Mr. Rogers eventually learns that Stryker was the guy behind the murders and that this guy wants to be the head honcho. So Roger is then kidnapped and placed in a homemade gas chamber. Luckily for him, though, Batman arrives just in time through the skylight. He rushes over and uses a handkerchief to actually plug the deadly gas coming in and uses a wrench to shatter the glass. He then reveals the entire plot to the readers via a monologue. Stryker then reaches for a gun and Batman counters with an awesome right hook right to the face, sending Stryker into a vat of acid. You know, because it's a chemical plant. Roger looks on completely stunned and Batman says, "A fitting end to his kind," then leaves through the skylight. As Roger looks around like, where did this guy go so that I can thank him? And also call the police because he's a murderer. At the end of the book, we find out that Batman is, of course, Bruce Wayne, and he smiles. Thus ends the case of the Chemical Syndicate. Now, Detective Comics number 27 laid down the foundation for Batman as we know him today. Well, I mean, everything except for, you know, killing people. Unless it's Earth 2 Batman or Dark Knight Earth 2 yeah, whatever. To this day, Batman is still a dark, gritty avenger of the night, minus the purple gloves. Honestly, I don't know how Kane thought a dude with purple gloves would strike terror into the hearts of his enemies. Maybe they cringed at his fashion choice or something. I really don't know what to tell you. Anyway, what I found interesting about this book, the first issue, is how much Burton and Keaton used for the very first Batman film in 1989. First, we have a kind of bored, strange Bruce Wayne. I mean, this guy looks really out of place in this book. His facial features, his, you know, outfit, you know, he just kind of looks weird. And while he has a lot of money, he just acts like a normal guy. Maybe that's why Commissioner Gordon is hanging out with him. And I know people rag on about Keaton's Wayne portrayal, saying that his performance was awkward and it really didn't feel like Bruce Wayne. You didn't get this feeling that this is a really rich, powerful guy. I mean, Keaton played him as just a normal, average Joe. But if you go back to reading this book, that's exactly how Bruce Wayne was showcased. So Keaton actually showed what Bruce Wayne was like when Bob Kane created him. And it actually worked pretty well for the modern age, if you think about it. Next, we also have the introduction of Batman to the bad guys. Now, in the film, there are two muggers that have either robbed a family or murdered them. I don't really remember. I know that they're sitting on the roof and they're talking about things. And that one guy's like, "You shouldn't have turned the gun on the kid, man. You shouldn't." Shut up! You want a cut of this money or not? But anyway, Batman appears out of nowhere and freaks them out in the middle of the night, then beats the crap out of them. Though not before getting shot a few times by the terrified goons, which is, you know, completely different than how this book goes. But you can see some influence there. Also, the whole smiling Batman thing. People get on George Clooney's case for being, you know, Mr. Smiley with Batman, but Keaton also would smile occasionally as the Batman. Like when he put the bomb on the strongman and threw him into, like a ditch or something, he had a smile. And also some other parts during the films, he smiled too, which showed a more human element under the mask of Batman, which was something that you weren't really seeing at that time, you know? So it was pretty cool. And I like that they showed a connection with DC Comics, Detective Comics number 27. Now, how this goes back to the original comic is, after Batman learned the identity of the mastermind in this issue, he smiles. I mean, his smile's kind of freaky, but it's still a smile. He actually does smile a lot in 1939. That and kills more people, leaving cool one-liners for 80s action stars to use 40 years later. That's right, Batman set the action hero bar before it even existed. You're welcome, Arnold. Even though the Joker was a costume villain in the Burton films, mostly Batman was fighting organized crime, and he had to solve a mystery, like Joker's chemical toxin thing. And in the comics, he would actually solve monthly, like, cases and things like that. Well, I mean, the name of the comic was Detective Comics. Lastly, the guy falling into the vat of acid was used later for the Joker in comics, but not when the Joker first appeared. It should also be noted, while Batman was being worked on, Bob Kane called up and even visited Burton on the set a few times. There's even pictures of Bob Kane, Michael Keaton, and Tim Burton, like, having a picture together, because Bob Kane was still alive during this point. For its time, too, Batman the 1989 movie turned a lot of heads and showed a very different Batman than the one comic stands and the campy TV show were showing, because I believe the 60s Batman show was on reruns on the Family Channel from like 1988 until 1992 or something like that, right before the animated series came on television. This was also Kane's vision retold for the modern times, and it's actually still one of my favorite Batman films to this day because you can see Bob Kane's direction and that they were really going with the source material for that. It's more of a Bob Kane story than it was a Frank Miller story, which we see with the Bale films. One thing people seem to ignore about Batman's past, though, is that he did kill people, and he showed no remorse for doing so. He was more than just a crime fighter. Batman was kind of like a manhunter for the FBI or something. Still, let's talk about some more stories from 1939, shall we? During his humble beginnings, the Batman solved a lot of petty crimes, though his actions did cause some problems with the local law enforcement. Except for Commissioner Gordon, he never really seemed to care about it. Take issue number 27, for instance, where a criminal called Mr. Frenchie is responsible for doing all types of jewel robberies in Gotham. As Batman dispatches some of his thugs and recovers some jewels and things like that, the police think Batman's actually in league with Frenchie. The Dark Knight uses this to his advantage and lures Frenchie out in the open, though, because Frenchie thinks he can commit more crimes while the police chase Batman, thinking he's the jewel thief. So as he goes and tries to do a robbery, Batman catches Frenchie and turns him into the police. Frenchie is so scared of Batman that he actually writes a confession that he was the one who did all the robberies and Batman is innocent. So even back then, Batman was able to terrify people, which is pretty cool. During the late 30s, Batman had all kinds of unique stories, though most of his villains were just one-shot issue foes. That is until Dr. Death in issue 29 and 30 of Detective Comics. This guy was basically trying to do a toxin thing, think like the Joker, like Keaton film, except he was only targeting wealthy Gothamites. The Batman eventually stops the toxin and saves the victims, but then he and Dr. Death have a fight and an explosion occurs, and Dr. Death's face becomes all disfigured and gross, which is something that actually happens to a lot of Batman's villains as, you know, time goes by. So basically, Dr. Death did this before it became a trendy thing to do. This is also the first real supervillain in comics, if you think about it, because this guy has a vendetta against Batman. Batman essentially created him, and overall he hates Batman and Gotham. And also, Batman does something a little bit different too. He kind of messes with the guy's family, namely his wife. He disguises himself as a reporter, and he's trying to get information about Dr. Death and, you know, what he's up to and stuff like that. And Bruce meets her a few times, which ticks off Dr. Death, who doesn't know that Bruce Wayne and Batman are one and the same. So he also has a I hate Bruce Wayne complex that most of comic book villains seem to share. Currently, Dr. Death, I believe, is causing mischief in the New 52, but I'm not really going to talk about that because, you know, it's a New 52. 30s Batman, which makes him very different than the Batman we know and love, was actually engaged to a girl named Julie Madison, whom we first meet in issue 31, and she starred in issue 32 as well. Though the relationship ends rather abruptly in issue 49 when she dumps Bruce Wayne. Now, her reasoning was he needed a real job. Now, she did this without realizing he saved her life dozens of times as the Batman. She was the Lois Lane of the Detective Comics books. And, you know, she just gets rid of him without any hesitation. Later, we find out she was an actress, and then she appeared again in the 70s as some type of, like, princess of a country, which was to pay homage to a Hollywood starlet in real life who became, like, a monarch of a country. So, I mean, yeah. But anyway, we're going to talk about more about Julie and Batman in Batman versus the Vampire, which was the next book after Dr. Death or whatever. This is a very, very odd story. Basically, Bruce's fiancée, Julie Madison, tried to kill a guy. Later, it's revealed that she was under a spell from a vampire or under hypnosis. Though before that, Bruce takes Julie to see a shrink. For trying to kill someone, the therapist, probably a Freudian, tells the happy couple, you two should take a vacation. Because, right, committing an attempted homicide with extreme disregard for human life just means, hey, I'm stressed and need to take a cruise to Europe, not 7 years in prison. I mean, where did this guy get his PhD? A cereal box? Anyway, Bruce and Julie go to France and Hungary for some much-needed R&R, you know, to escape the feds. However, on the boat, Julie tries to kill again. I mean, she falls into a trance. That's it. All joking aside, actually, a man is causing Julie to try and kill people. Isn't that always the case? This masked man calls himself Monk. No, it has nothing to do with that popular Monk show either. This Monk is bad and fights Batman a lot. Then he flees to Paris, where he tricks Batman into a deadly trap. Of course, Batman escapes. For some reason, the writers have Monk run off to Hungary, and the book ends on a cliffhanger. That way they can kind of do a continuation and sell more books. On to issue 32, Batman vs. the Vampire 2. Batman flies his Batplane into the land of werewolves. Spotting a stagecoach, Batman attacks it, thinking it was the Monk. Though sadly, he discovers that it was a young woman instead. Batman takes the dazed woman back to his hotel to stay with Julie. How Julie ended up there, we don't really know. She's just in the hotel because Batman thought it would be a great idea to bring his fiancée with him to chase the guy who can hypnotize her at any point in time. Master crime fighter indeed. Anyway, while at the hotel, Dala, which is her name, don't think Darlek, you know, Dala, the woman Batman saved from the stagecoach that he actually attacked, she actually attacks Julie at the hotel, then claims to be a vampire servant of Monk. Batman shows up randomly and stops the woman from killing Julie, and then takes Dala with him. While flying the Batplane, Monk takes control of Batman's mind and reveals himself as the Vampire Master. He then throws Batman into a pit with wolves in it. Thinking the hero is doomed, he then sneaks off to have a nap because he sees dawn approaching. And you know what sunlight does to a vampire's complexion. Batman then uses his bat line and swings to safety because the vampire didn't think to take away Batman's utility belt. After searching the castle for hours, the Batman eventually finds 2 coffins and some silver lying around. He then melts the statue down and makes bullets. Then he shoots the coffins repeatedly until the people, I mean monsters, are dead. And that is how the book ends. Summer and fall of 1939, readers were dazzled by the adventures of Batman and really couldn't get enough of him. But why did he become the Batman is what the readers ask. What events guided his path to becoming this justice-fueled crime fighter? And Detective Comics gave the public its answer with his tragic origins, November of 1939, in issue 33. The Batman's War Against the Dirigible of Doom. It's like a blimp. Basically, it also sounds like the name of a cereal, doesn't it? You know those film cereals? No. This tale starts out with the blimp using a death ray on the people of Manhattan, and Batman thinks the terrorist is none other than Dr. Karl Kruger. Yep, this was a World War II propaganda book. Batman breaks into the Doctor's hideout and fights his army of lieutenants and soldiers, though he's nearly killed, not by the soldiers, but when a burning building falls on top of him. Where's Superman when you need him, right? As Bruce is trapped, he begins to have flashbacks of why he became the hero Gotham deserves, but not the one it really needs. At least, I think it happened that way, or maybe it was that other thing. Anyway, during a stick-up in the streets of Gotham, his parents were slain by a guy named Joe Chill. Vowing to avenge their death, Bruce dedicates his entire life to achieving physical and mental perfection. Using his unsurpassed skills, see all the subtle hints about being perfect, Bruce decides to dress up like a bat and fight injustice everywhere. Renewed with his mental power, Bruce survives the building that fell on top of him and continues the hunt. After interrogating one of the thugs after dark, Batman is led to the other hideout. Because, you know, this Kruger guy has, like, so many hideouts. He then tries to sabotage the blimp, but ends up getting shot. Yep, breaking and entering is frowned upon, and, well, you could get shot. Readers learn for the very first time, though, that Batman is indeed wearing a bulletproof vest under his colorful costume. General Kruger takes the blimp into the skies to destroy America, but is thwarted by the Batman, who rams the Batplane into the blimp, causing it to explode and crash in the river. Though, amazingly, the Batman is the only one to survive a head-on collision with a blimp. Unscathed, I might add, too. I'm serious, that's how it worked. But then things get really interesting. I have one more story to share with you guys. In the Peril of Paris, December 1939, or is it Peril in Paris? I don't really remember. The story goes back to the events of the vampire case. So DC, or Detective Comics, just totally sequence break. Now, the reason why they did this, the rumor going around back then, was the public was so interested in finding out about why Batman became Batman that they pushed the continuation issue, which is Peril in Paris, about, you know, the whole vampire saga, ahead a month so that they could quickly throw together a propaganda book along with Batman's origin and get it up there in November. So that's why they kind of sequence break. But even in comics today, it's very common for issues to continue in other issues later and then piece together the stories or other books. It's very confusing. It's not as confusing as manga, but still pretty, yeah. But anyway, back to the vampire case. Batman has just killed Monk and his lady friend in Paris, you know, the other vampire chick. And for some reason, outside his hotel, he finds a man with no face. No Face chats it up with Batman and tells him, actually, we first met at a party hosted by some duke. So either this guy knows Batman is Bruce Wayne, or Batman likes to go to galas because everybody's wearing masks. You know, he can just hang out and be normal for, well, him. We learned that the man without a face is actually called Charles. And the reason that his face was pulled off or removed is because the Duke actually coveted Charles' wife. Batman feels sorry for No Face and goes after the Duke, but ends up falling into another death trap. So now we know why the 60s campy series got the constant death trap peril thing. It was from Bob Kane and all his kooky death trap things. And of course the 50s really had a field day with all the, you know, death traps. After escaping the torture wheel of death thing, we discover Charles' wife, Clara, has been kidnapped too. Yeah, the plot in this book goes all over the place. It's like, wasn't she with her husband at the hotel and now she's kidnapped and Also, what's really funny is Batman gets a new Batplane, even though this takes place after the vampire arc and his plane was destroyed in the propaganda book. I'm sorry. Once Batman spots the Duke's car, he leaps onto the plane and lands on the car, all Jackie Chan-like. The Duke and him fight on top of the car, he saves the girl, and the car careens off a cliff. Though before the car actually falls off, Batman and Clara, or whatever her name is, they leap off the car with seconds to spare. And then No Face and his wife are reunited, and it feels so good, even though they were together at the hotel, and Batman leaves. Thus concludes Batman's 1939 stories. By 1940, when that rolled around, eventually our hero finally ditched the purple gloves, gets a sidekick, some colorful supervillains, and even named his gadgets. Also, on occasion, he carried a sidearm too, which folks still have a hard time accepting that Batman carried a gun. But like I said, Bob Kane kind of created Batman with the inspiration of him being like a gumshoe manhunter, which was actually going on around that time, where, and before that, in the 20s and things like that, where FBI or whatever their organization was called back then were going after gangsters and things like that and having posses. So it wasn't uncommon for this type of idea to exist back then. So the idea that Batman would be a guy who would kill people and hunt down criminals, that goes with the whole manhunter approach. You know, dead or alive, you're coming with me. Except Bats never really got a reward from the people or the city. His only reward was that justice was done. Then he got to run around in a cape and cowl on the streets of Gotham at night without people saying weird things about him. And that's it for this lore video, ladies and gentlemen. I could spend a few more vids talking about Bob Kane's Dark Knight, and the gritty cases of the 1940s and things like that, but I don't think I'm going to in this video. Maybe later or in a future Batman games where Robin comes into play, because when Robin was introduced, it wasn't really campy until the 50s, so just keep that in mind. Next time we'll be looking at the Gotham by Gaslight Batman, which is a tale where Batman versus Jack the Ripper in England. Thanks so much for watching another lore video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you learned something, don't forget to hit the like button, alright? Until next time, Bat fans, God bless, and happy gaming. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. I'm out.
Well, that's the end of this video. Who's up for Chinese? Seriously though, make sure to like, favorite, and share this delicious video. Unless, of course, you like being wrapped in plastic and left in the gutter. Oops, sorry, a force of habit.